Colonel Sarah Martinez had served her country for 28 years. At 52, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that came from leading soldiers through impossible situations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite being in civilian clothes, everything about her posture spoke of military precision. That Tuesday evening, she stopped at Harrison's grocery store on her way home from the base. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she pushed her cart through the produce section, selecting fresh vegetables for dinner. Her husband, James, would be home late from his job at the engineering firm, so she had time to prepare his favorite meal. The store was nearly empty except for a few late shoppers. Sarah moved methodically through the aisles, her mind still processing the day's briefings about upcoming deployment schedules. She had 47 soldiers under her command, and their safety was always her primary concern. As she reached for a bag of rice on the top shelf, her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Emily, now a doctor in Chicago. "Mom, saw the news about the promotion ceremony. So proud of you. Can't wait to celebrate when I visit next month." Sarah smiled, remembering the ceremony from earlier that week where she had been recognized for her exceptional service in logistics and personnel management. The base commander had praised her ability to maintain unit cohesion during challenging overseas assignments. It felt good to be acknowledged, though she had never served for recognition. She turned her cart toward the checkout area, mentally reviewing her grocery list. James had requested his mother's recipe for beef stew, and she wanted to surprise him. After nearly 30 years of marriage, these small gestures still mattered. The young cashier, probably a college student working part-time, greeted her with a tired smile. "Evening, ma'am. How are you today?" "Good, thank you," Sarah replied, beginning to place items on the conveyor belt. She noticed the cashier's name tag read Kevin, and that he handled each item with care despite clearly being exhausted from a long shift. Behind her, she heard the automatic doors whoosh open as another customer entered. The sound of heavy boots echoed against the linoleum floor, but she didn't turn around, focused on organizing her purchases and finding her wallet. "That'll be $68.43, Kevin said, scanning the last item. Sarah reached into her purse for her credit card. The same routine she had performed thousands of times before. In that moment, she was simply a woman buying groceries for her family, thinking about the peaceful evening ahead. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, her life would change forever. The man who had just entered the store was Officer Derek Thompson, a 12-year veteran of the local police force who had received multiple complaints about excessive force over the past year. He was off duty but still in uniform, having just finished his shift. Thompson had a reputation among his colleagues for being quick to escalate situations. His training records showed consistent issues with de-escalation techniques, and he had been involved in 3 separate incidents of questionable conduct in the past 18 months. Each time, the department had given him additional training rather than serious disciplinary action. As Sarah handed her card to Kevin, Thompson approached the checkout area behind her. His eyes immediately fixed on her, and his expression changed. In his mind, assumptions began forming based solely on her appearance and the color of her skin. What Thompson didn't know was that he was looking at one of the most decorated officers in the military, a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to serving the same country he had sworn to protect. He didn't see her rank, her service, or her character. He saw only what his prejudices allowed him to see. Sarah finished her transaction and began loading her bags into her cart. The evening air would be cool, and she looked forward to the drive home through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. James would appreciate the effort she had put into shopping for his favorite meal. As she turned to leave, pushing her cart toward the exit, Thompson made a decision that would cost him everything. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, his training overridden by the bias that had been growing unchecked for years. The peaceful grocery store was about to become the scene of an encounter that would expose the ugly reality of racial profiling and forever change the lives of everyone present. Sarah Martinez, who had spent decades protecting others, was about to need protection herself from the very system she had served alongside. Kevin the cashier continued scanning items for the next customer, unaware that he was about to witness something that would haunt him for months to come. The security cameras mounted in the corners of the store began recording what would become evidence in a case that would shake the entire police department. In 30 seconds, a routine grocery shopping trip would transform into a national news story about justice, prejudice, and the courage required to stand up against systemic racism. The colonel who had faced enemy fire without flinching was about to face a different kind of battle, one that would test not her military training, but her faith in the system she had devoted her life to defending. "Stop right there." Thompson's voice cut through the quiet store like a blade. His hand was already on his holstered weapon, though he hadn't drawn it yet. The command was sharp, aggressive, and completely unexpected. Sarah froze mid-step, her cart halfway to the exit. 28 years of military training kicked in automatically. She raised her hands slightly, keeping them visible, and turned slowly to face the officer. Her heart rate increased, but her expression remained calm and controlled. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked in a steady voice, the same tone she had used to address superior officers throughout her career. She could see the tension in his stance, the way his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. This was a man prepared for confrontation. "Don't move," Thompson barked, taking a step closer. "What's in the bags?" Kevin, the cashier, looked up from the register, confusion written across his young face. The other customers in the store, an elderly man buying milk and a woman with a toddler, stopped what they were doing and stared. The normal sounds of the grocery store seemed to fade away. "Groceries," Sarah replied simply. "I just purchased them from this register." She gestured carefully toward Kevin, who nodded quickly. "That's right," Kevin said, his voice cracking slightly. "She just bought groceries. I rang her up myself." But Thompson wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, and she could see something dangerous in his gaze. This wasn't about groceries or suspected shoplifting. This was about something else entirely, something that made her stomach tighten with a familiar feeling she hadn't experienced since her early days in the military. "I need to search your bags," Thompson announced, stepping closer. "There have been reports of theft in this area." Sarah knew this was false. She had shopped at this store for 5 years since moving to the neighborhood. There had been no unusual incidents, no increased security measures, nothing to suggest a pattern of theft. But she also knew that arguing would only escalate the situation. "Of course," she said calmly. "The receipt is in the top bag." As she reached slowly into the bag to retrieve the receipt, Thompson's hand moved to his weapon. The motion was quick, practiced, and completely disproportionate to the situation. The distinctive sound of leather against metal as his hand gripped the gun handle made everyone in the store tense. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted, now drawing his service weapon and pointing it directly at Sarah's chest. The transformation in the store was immediate and terrifying. Kevin gasped audibly and stepped backward, knocking over a display of candy. The elderly man dropped his milk jug, which splattered across the floor. The woman with the toddler grabbed her child and tucked behind an aisle. Sarah's hands immediately went up, her military training taking over completely. She had been in combat zones where enemy soldiers pointed weapons at her, but this felt different. This felt wrong in a way that cut deeper than any battlefield experience. "Officer," she said, her voice remaining steady despite the weapon pointed at her. "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Army. My identification is in my purse. I'm not a threat to anyone." "I don't care who you claim to be," Thompson snarled, keeping the gun trained on her. "Get on the ground, now." The store's security guard, an older man named Robert who had worked at Harrison's for 8 years, appeared from the back office. He had been watching the security monitors and couldn't believe what he was seeing. His own military background told him immediately that something was very wrong with this situation. "Officer Thompson," Robert called out, his voice carrying the authority of his own service years. "Sir, I've been watching the monitors. This woman purchased groceries and was leaving the store normally. There's no indication of any wrongdoing." Thompson turned his head toward Robert but kept his weapon pointed at Sarah. "Stay out of this, old man. This doesn't concern you." But it did concern Robert. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam and recognized the bearing of a fellow service member when he saw one. The woman, standing with her hands raised, facing down a loaded weapon with remarkable composure, had the unmistakable presence of someone who had led others in dangerous situations. Sarah remained motionless, her hands raised, her breathing controlled. She was calculating options, but every scenario ended with potential violence. This officer was beyond reason, beyond protocol, and beyond the boundaries of acceptable police work. Kevin had managed to reach the store's panic button behind the register, and silent alarms were now alerting both the store's management company and the local police dispatch. Within minutes, additional officers would arrive, but Sarah didn't know if that would help or make things worse. "Ma'am," Robert said quietly to Sarah, "I've called for backup. Just stay calm." Thompson spun toward Robert, his weapon wavering between the two of them. "I said stay out of this, everyone stay back." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had begun as racial profiling was now escalating into something that could turn deadly. Thompson's finger was on the trigger of his service weapon, pointed at an unarmed woman whose only crime had been shopping while black. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, thinking of James, of Emily, of the soldiers under her command who looked up to her for leadership. She had faced enemy fire, navigated political minefields at the Pentagon, and earned the respect of generals and enlisted personnel alike. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was surviving the next few minutes and hoping that cooler heads would prevail when additional officers arrived. She prayed that the backup would be more professional, more reasonable, and more willing to see her as a human being rather than a threat. The next 3 minutes felt like hours. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands raised while Thompson kept his weapon pointed at her chest. The store had gone completely silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of approaching sirens. Kevin had managed to record part of the incident on his phone after pressing the panic button. His hands shook as he held the device, barely believing what he was witnessing. This wasn't like the police encounters he had seen in movies or on television. This felt raw, real, and terrifyingly unpredictable. "Put the phone away," Thompson yelled when he noticed Kevin recording. But the young man had already uploaded the footage to social media, where it would soon begin spreading across the internet at lightning speed. The first backup officer to arrive was Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran known for her calm professionalism and expertise in de-escalation. As she entered the store, she immediately assessed the situation and felt her stomach drop. Thompson had his weapon drawn on an obviously unarmed civilian in a grocery store with witnesses everywhere. "Thompson, what's the situation?" Rodriguez called out, her own hand resting on her weapon but not drawing it. "Suspected theft," Thompson replied without taking his eyes off Sarah. Subject was acting suspicious. Rodriguez looked around the scene. She saw the grocery bags, the receipt lying on the ground where Sarah had dropped it when ordered to raise her hands, and the store's security guard, who was shaking his head in dismay. Nothing about this situation suggested theft or any other crime. "Thompson, lower your weapon," Rodriguez ordered. "Let me talk to everyone and figure out what's happening here." "No," Thompson snapped. "This suspect needs to be secured first." Rodriguez had worked with Thompson before and knew his reputation for escalating situations unnecessarily. She also noticed something in his demeanor that suggested this wasn't really about suspected theft. The way he looked at the woman, the disproportionate response to a simple grocery shopping trip, all pointed to something much worse. A second backup officer arrived, followed quickly by a third. The store was now filled with police, but instead of making Sarah feel safer, the additional uniforms only made her more aware of how vulnerable she was. She had seen enough news reports to know that situations like this sometimes ended badly, regardless of innocence. "Ma'am," Sergeant Rodriguez said gently. "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. Can you tell me your name?" "Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Army," Sarah replied, her voice steady but strained. "I was shopping for groceries. I have my military ID in my purse, along with the receipt for my purchases." The other officers exchanged glances. The word colonel carried weight, even for police officers. Rodriguez especially understood the significance, as her own brother served in the Navy. Thompson, Rodriguez said more firmly, lower your weapon immediately. This woman is a military officer and poses no threat. I don't care what she claims to be, Thompson responded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. He was beginning to realize that the situation was not going as he had expected. Robert, the security guard, stepped forward carefully. Officers, I have the entire incident on our security system. This woman made a normal purchase, paid with her credit card, and was leaving the store when Officer Thompson confronted her. There was no suspicious behavior, no theft, nothing that would justify this response. The third officer, a rookie named Martinez, no relation to Sarah, looked uncomfortable. He had joined the police force to help his community, and what he was witnessing didn't align with his understanding of proper police procedure. Sergeant, he said quietly to Rodriguez, should we be calling this in to the captain? Rodriguez nodded grimly. She knew that within hours, this incident would be under investigation. The presence of witnesses, security cameras, and now social media meant there would be no way to cover up whatever had happened here. Thompson, she said one final time, I am ordering you to holster your weapon and step back. This situation is over. For a moment, Thompson hesitated. Sarah could see the war playing out on his face, his prejudices fighting against his training in the presence of his fellow officers. Finally, slowly, he lowered his gun and holstered it. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief, but her military training kept her upright. She lowered her hands carefully, still moving slowly to avoid any misunderstanding. Thank you, Sergeant, she said to Rodriguez. May I retrieve my identification now? Of course, ma'am. Take your time. As Sarah reached into her purse, her hands trembled slightly for the first time. The adrenaline that had kept her calm during the confrontation was beginning to wear off, replaced by the emotional impact of what had just occurred. She handed her military ID to Rodriguez, who examined it carefully and then showed it to the other officers. The ID confirmed everything Sarah had said. She was indeed a colonel in the United States Army, currently stationed at the nearby base. Ma'am, I apologize for what happened here, Rodriguez said sincerely. This should never have occurred. Thompson stood to the side, no longer part of the conversation. He was beginning to understand that his actions would have consequences, but he wasn't yet grasping the full scope of what those consequences might be. Kevin approached cautiously, still holding his phone. Colonel Martinez, I recorded what happened. If you need it for anything, I have the whole thing. Sarah looked at the young man with gratitude. Thank you, Kevin. Your quick thinking might have prevented this from becoming much worse. As the immediate danger passed, Sarah began to process what had really happened. A police officer had drawn his weapon on her based solely on her appearance while she was engaged in the most mundane activity possible, buying groceries. The realization was both infuriating and heartbreaking. Within an hour of Kevin's video being posted online, it had been shared over 1,000 times. The footage was clear and damning. An unarmed woman shopping for groceries, a police officer drawing his weapon without justification, and the obvious racial dynamics at play. Comments began pouring in from viewers across the country, many expressing outrage and demanding accountability. Sarah sat in the store's office with Sergeant Rodriguez, giving her official statement about the incident. Her hands had stopped shaking, but the emotional weight of what had happened was settling in. 28 years of military service, multiple deployments, and a spotless record, yet she had been treated like a criminal for the color of her skin. Colonel Martinez, Rodriguez said gently, I want you to know that Officer Thompson's actions do not represent our department's values or training. We will be conducting a full investigation. Sarah nodded, though she had heard similar promises before in other contexts. Sergeant, I appreciate your professionalism tonight. You and your officers handled the situation exactly as it should have been handled from the beginning. Rodriguez felt a mix of shame and anger about her colleague's behavior. She had sworn an oath to protect and serve all citizens, and tonight she had seen that oath violated in the worst possible way. Meanwhile, across town, James Martinez was finishing up a late project at his engineering firm, when his phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends and colleagues were tagging him in social media posts, asking if the woman in the video was his wife. When he finally watched the footage, his blood ran cold. He immediately tried calling Sarah, but her phone was turned off as she dealt with the police investigation. Not knowing if she was safe or hurt, James raced to his car and drove toward the grocery store, his mind spinning with fear and rage. Back at the store, Captain William Hayes arrived to personally oversee the situation. Hayes was a 25-year veteran of the force who had worked hard to build community trust and implement bias training throughout the department. The video of Thompson's actions had already reached his desk, and he knew this incident could undo years of progress. "Colonel Martinez," Captain Hayes said after introducing himself, "on behalf of the entire police department, I offer my sincerest apologies. What happened here tonight was completely unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for." Sarah studied the captain's face and saw genuine remorse there. "Captain Hayes, I appreciate your words, but apologies won't fix the deeper problem here. Your officer saw a black woman in a grocery store and immediately assumed I was a criminal. That kind of thinking doesn't happen overnight." Hayes knew she was right. Thompson's personnel file showed a pattern of complaints and questionable judgments that had been addressed with training rather than serious discipline. The department had failed to hold him accountable before it reached this point. "You're absolutely right," Hayes admitted. "And I want you to know that we will be taking serious action. Officer Thompson will be suspended pending a full investigation, and we will be reviewing all of his previous cases and interactions." As they spoke, Thompson sat in his patrol car outside the store, fully understanding for the first time that his career was likely over. His phone was already ringing with calls from the police union, his supervisor, and reporters who had gotten hold of his name from social media. He had told himself over the years that his aggressive approach to policing was about safety and crime prevention. But sitting alone in his car, watching the lights of the store where he had just threatened an innocent woman, he could no longer hide from the truth about his motivations. James arrived at the store just as Sarah was finishing her statement. When she saw her husband rushing through the doors, the emotional control she had maintained throughout the ordeal finally cracked. She fell into his arms, and for the first time since the incident began, she allowed herself to cry. "I'm so sorry," James whispered, holding her tightly. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." "You couldn't have known," Sarah replied, though she was grateful for his presence now. James had been her anchor through 28 years of military challenges, and she needed that strength more than ever. Kevin, who had stayed late to give his statement, approached them hesitantly. "Colonel Martinez, I wanted you to know that everyone who works here thinks you handled that situation with incredible grace. I've never seen anyone stay so calm under pressure." Sarah managed a small smile. "Thank you, Kevin. Your quick thinking with the video and the panic button probably saved lives tonight." As word spread throughout the military base where Sarah worked, her colleagues and subordinates began expressing their support. General Patricia Williams, the base commander, issued a statement condemning the officer's actions and praising Colonel Martinez's composure under pressure. The incident was also reaching national attention. News outlets were picking up the story, and civil rights organizations were taking note. What had started as one woman's grocery shopping trip was becoming a symbol of the ongoing struggle against racial profiling and police misconduct. Dr. Emily Martinez, Sarah's daughter, was on her way home from the hospital in Chicago when a colleague sent her the video. Seeing her mother threatened by a police officer while simply buying groceries filled her with a rage she had never experienced. She immediately booked the first flight home, knowing her parents would need her support in the difficult days ahead. The story was far from over. Thompson would face discipline, the department would conduct its investigation, and Sarah would have to decide whether to pursue legal action. But more importantly, the incident had sparked a conversation about the need for real change in how police officers are trained, supervised, and held accountable for their actions. As Sarah and James drove home that night, they both knew that their lives had changed forever. The sense of safety and trust that comes from a lifetime of public service had been shaken, but their commitment to justice and equality had only grown stronger. By morning, Kevin's video had gone viral with over 2 million views across various social media platforms. News trucks were parked outside both the grocery store and the police station. Major news networks were calling it a clear case of racial profiling that highlighted ongoing issues with police accountability. Sarah woke up to hundreds of messages on her phone. Fellow military officers, old friends from her deployments, and complete strangers were reaching out with support and outrage. The story had touched a nerve across the country, particularly within the military community where respect for service members was considered sacred. "Mom, I'm flying in today," Emily said during their morning phone call. "I can't believe this happened to you. I've seen the video, and I'm so proud of how you handled yourself, but I'm also furious." Sarah appreciated her daughter's support, though she wished Emily didn't have to see her mother in such a vulnerable position. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Your father and I are dealing with it." "No, Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with it. This should never have happened in the first place." The police department was in crisis mode. Captain Hayes had spent the night reviewing Thompson's entire career, and what he found made him sick. There were 14 separate complaints about excessive force or inappropriate conduct, most from minority citizens. Each time, Thompson had received additional training or counseling instead of serious discipline. "How did we let this go on for so long?" Hayes asked his deputy chief during their emergency meeting. "Politics, fear of lawsuits, and a union that protects bad cops," came the honest reply. "But this time is different. There's video witnesses and the victim is a decorated military officer. We can't sweep this under the rug." Thompson had been placed on administrative leave without pay, pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs was reopening several of his previous cases, and the district attorney's office was considering criminal charges for assault with a deadly weapon. The officers' union representative, Danny Morrison, tried to meet with Thompson to discuss his defense options, but even Morrison knew this case was nearly impossible to justify. "Derek, you drew your weapon on a woman buying groceries," Morrison said bluntly. "She had a receipt, she had done nothing wrong, and you escalated the situation beyond any reasonable protocol. I've defended a lot of officers over the years, but this one is going to be very difficult." Thompson sat in his kitchen, still wearing yesterday's uniform, staring at his service weapon on the table. 28 years ago, he had sworn to protect and serve his community. Now he was trying to figure out when he had lost his way. His wife, Linda, had seen the video and was horrified. "Derek, that could have been my sister, my mother, any woman in our family. How did you become someone who would do something like this?" The question haunted him because he didn't have a good answer. The prejudices had built up gradually over years of policing, reinforced by colleagues who shared similar views and a department culture that had enabled rather than corrected his behavior. At the military base, General Williams called Sarah into her office for a private meeting. "Colonel Martinez, I want you to know that you have the full support of this command and the entire United States Army. What happened to you was in disgrace, and we will not stand for it." "Thank you, General. I appreciate the support, but I'm more concerned about what this means for other service members and civilians who don't have the resources or platform that I have." Williams nodded with respect. "That's exactly the kind of leadership thinking I would expect from you. Have you considered what you want to do going forward? The media attention could be used as a platform for positive change." Sarah had been thinking about exactly that question. She had spent her career serving others, and this incident had shown her a new battlefield where her service was needed. The grocery store had become an unlikely pilgrimage site. People were leaving flowers, American flags, and notes of support outside the entrance. Robert, the security guard, found himself giving impromptu interviews about Sarah's dignity during the confrontation. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that with such grace," he told a reporter. "That woman is a true soldier, and she shouldn't have had to prove her worth to anyone." Kevin had become something of a local hero for his quick thinking. With the video, college students were calling him courageous for documenting the incident and helping to hold the officer accountable. But he was struggling with the attention, preferring to focus on his studies and his part-time job. "I just did what anyone should do," he told his friends. "When you see something wrong happening, you have to speak up." The national conversation about the incident was dividing along predictable lines, but even many police officers were condemning Thompson's actions. Police chiefs from major cities were using the incident as an example of the kind of behavior that destroyed community trust and put good officers at risk. Sarah's story had also resonated internationally. Military officers from allied countries were expressing solidarity, and civil rights leaders were using her experience to highlight the broader issue of racial profiling in America. As the day progressed, Sarah made a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She would not just seek accountability for Thompson's actions, she would use her platform to advocate for real reform in police training and accountability. "James," she said that evening as they watched the news coverage together, "I think this happened for a reason. Maybe my real mission is just beginning." James took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll be right there with you. You've served this country with honor for 28 years, and if you want to continue that service in a different way, I support you completely." Thompson, meanwhile, was coming to terms with the reality that his law enforcement career was over. But more than that, he was beginning to understand the human cost of his actions. The woman he had threatened was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone who had dedicated her life to protecting the very freedoms he had sworn to uphold. The reckoning was just beginning, but it was clear that this incident would not be quietly forgotten or brushed aside. Too many people had seen the truth, and too many voices were demanding change. 3 weeks after the incident, Officer Derek Thompson was officially terminated from the police force. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of misconduct spanning 12 years, and the district attorney's office filed criminal charges for assault with a deadly weapon and deprivation of rights under color of authority. Thompson stood in the police station one final time, turning in his badge and service weapon. Captain Hayes personally oversaw the process, wanting to ensure there was closure for everyone involved. "Derek, I hope you understand that this decision wasn't just about one incident," Hayes said solemnly. "It was about a pattern of behavior that we should have addressed years ago. We failed the community, and we failed you by not holding you accountable earlier." Thompson nodded, his face showing the weight of his actions. "I know, Captain. I've had a lot of time to think about what I became. I want you to know that I've reached out to Colonel Martinez's attorney to express my remorse and to cooperate fully with any civil proceedings." The termination made national news, with many seeing it as a rare example of accountability in cases of police misconduct. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't Thompson's punishment. It was the broader conversation about reform that had emerged from her experience. She had used her newfound platform to testify before Congress about the need for better police training and accountability measures. Her military bearing and calm demeanor made her a powerful advocate for change, and lawmakers from both parties listened when she spoke. "I served this country for 28 years, she told the Congressional Committee. "I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When a police officer draws his weapon on an innocent citizen because of the color of her skin, he becomes an enemy of the very principles I swore to protect." Her testimony was viewed millions of times online and became a rallying cry for police reform advocates. The phrase, "enemies of the Constitution," began appearing on protest signs and in speeches by civil rights leaders. Emily had taken a leave of absence from her medical practice to help her mother navigate the media attention and speaking opportunities. Watching her mother transform pain into purpose had been inspiring, though she worried about the toll it was taking. "Mom, you don't have to carry this burden alone," Emily said as they prepared for another television interview. "You've already done so much good from this terrible situation." "Sweetheart, I've been carrying burdens my whole career," Sarah replied with a gentle smile. "The difference now is that I'm carrying this one by choice, and I can see it making a real difference." The police department had undergone significant reforms in response to the incident. All officers were required to complete intensive bias training, and a new civilian oversight board was established to review complaints. Captain Hayes had been promoted to chief, largely because of his handling of the Thompson case. Kevin had been offered scholarships by several universities impressed by his courage in documenting the incident. He chose to study criminal justice, hoping to become part of the solution to problems in law enforcement. "Colonel Martinez inspired me," he explained to a reporter. If she could stay that calm and dignified while facing down a gun, I can certainly dedicate my career to making sure it doesn't happen to others. Robert, the security guard, had been recognized by several veterans organizations for his quick thinking and support of a fellow service member. The recognition meant a lot to him, as his own military service had gone largely unnoticed for decades. The grocery store had installed a memorial plaque near the entrance, not to commemorate the incident itself, but to honor the dignity and courage that Sarah had shown during those terrifying minutes. It read, "In recognition of Colonel Sarah Martinez and all who stand with courage against injustice." Thompson's criminal trial was scheduled for the following month, but he had already indicated through his attorney that he would plead guilty to all charges. He had also written a personal letter to Sarah, which she had chosen not to read, though she appreciated the gesture. "Some people have asked me if I forgive Officer Thompson," Sarah said during her final major television interview. "Forgiveness is a personal journey, and I'm not there yet. But what I can tell you is that I don't hate him. I feel sorry for him, because hatred poisoned his ability to see other people as human beings. My focus is on making sure the system changes so that what happened to me doesn't happen to others." James had watched his wife transform from a victim of injustice into a national leader for change, and he couldn't have been prouder. Their marriage had grown even stronger through the ordeal, united by a shared commitment to making something positive from something terrible. "You know," he told Sarah one evening as they walked through their neighborhood, "I think this might be the most important mission of your career." Sarah considered his words as they passed the house of their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had left flowers on their doorstep after seeing the news. The elderly woman had faced her own experiences with discrimination over the years, and she had thanked Sarah for giving voice to something many people had experienced but couldn't express. "Maybe you're right," Sarah agreed. 28 years in the Army taught me how to fight external enemies. This situation has taught me how to fight the enemies within.